jump on in, and as Pig will come back in with him, that's just fine too. We're going to wrap up today's series with another different look at growth. And in particular, we're excited to share with you a paper that we just recently published from Texas Children's Hospital looking at the babies who were fed an exclusive human milk diet while they were in the NICU, and now we brought them back at 2 years of age and to start to take a look and see some of those outcomes. So we'll look at that. And again, we're talking about the exclusive human milk diet. We've already talked about all the great benefits that diet provides: decreased rates of neck, decreased rates of bronchopulmonary dysplasia, retinopathy of prematurity, and late onset sepsis. So what do we know particularly about growth? And we have a big concern about babies who are small for gestational age, which means that they were born lower than the 10th percentile for weight at birth. So we know from previous studies that were, granted a lot of those studies were done on infants receiving formula. So we have a little bit less information on infants who got human milk with a cow's milk fortifier. But we know that the babies who got formula, the SGA babies in particular, had too much of a rapid catch-up growth period. And this set them up for metabolic disorders later on in life. It set them up for more truncal location or central adiposity, so where their fat mass is in that gut area and closer to the heart. So sometimes you can think of it more as, in fashion we hear about, like, are you an apple or a pear? Like, where do you have your weight or whatever. But that does make sense when it comes to risk factors. So if you are more of an apple shape and you carry more weight in your middle section compared to down by your hips, that is related to heart disease. And so that's what we were seeing with SGA kids, is that we were seeing that they were having higher risk of metabolic syndrome, even into adulthood. So again, I go back to that first 1,000 days of life is how we set these babies up at that time. That critical window of their life really has these long-term impacts. So in adults with cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes, their post-infancy early childhood weight gain and BMI were very important factors to predict body fat mass and these consequential diseases. So we want to be avoiding this. We want to do better now. So now that we have different feeding strategies and different products that we can feed, can we do better and not set up SGA babies for metabolic syndrome, cardiovascular disease, heart disease, and diabetes? Premature babies, in particular very low birth weight babies, struggle to grow. We've talked about that all day today. I love and I hate this first bullet point here. Half to almost all of very low birth weight babies will experience postnatal growth restriction. They will fall off that growth curve. It will flatten out. They will remain below the 10th percentile. And when I see that, I'm just like, oh, and it's from really, really great sources where you get these numbers from, and you're like, really? Maybe our babies aren't that bad. Well, let's go collect some data about it. There's some helpful but not helpful information, so there's been several reviews to look at this of how can we improve infant nutrition and how can we make babies grow. They're kind of useless because they all just say, oh, you should provide them with enough nutrients and that human milk is really great. And it's like, okay, great, tell me something I don't know. That's not helpful. Like, okay, great. But that's really, I just point that out to say, like, sometimes even that's all we've got. That's all that we can agree upon. So it's really important for us to get better data. So I have kind of a different slide that we had from before. Just, again, all of those reasons why babies don't grow. There's so many reasons. And Terry's done a great job about talking about different feeding products lead to feeds being held for more times. And that leads to, how does that affect gut atrophy? And then how does that cascade into, well, if they didn't tolerate it then, they're certainly not going to tolerate it now because we've just kicked them in the gut, basically. So, all of these things are really important for us to consider. So a few years ago, we looked at our data to say, basically, can we get babies to grow on the exclusive human milk diet? And this, again, came from okay, we showed that babies do better with neck. Okay, check. Okay, now babies do better with late onset sepsis and BPD and ROP. Okay, check. Okay, but are they growing? You know, because, and what we had seen before in the growth data was that they were growing the same as before. Well, we're still starting to hear, you know, well, are they really? And again, can we do better? So that's what we started looking at. Here are results I wanted to share with you first. Is just even, so this looks at growth velocities, and so we're looking at grams per kilo per day. And that's one way to look at growth, and it's a very useful tool way to look at growth. So I like grams per kilo per day. In the yellow bar, you can see our weight was 25 grams per kilo per day. That was fantastic growth. We're super excited about that. We are over the moon about that. Length was 1 centimeter per week. We are totally happy about that too. That is just fine. We are right on target. Head circumference again. It's about 0.7. We'd like that to be more like 0.9 or 1 centimeter per week. So we're a little bit behind on that. Again, historically though, it matched what the calcium fortifier growth outcomes were doing too. Okay, so this, if you're just in your unit and you're just talking about growth in terms of grams per kilo per day, it can be a little bit deceptive. Because if you're just looking at this and you're like, oh, you know, today was 15 grams per kilo per day, we are right on target. Easy, check. Moving on. What's the next thing? Let's talk about something hard. How's that heart doing? It's not the whole story. So let's also talk about percentiles. Where are they on the growth curve? They could be gaining 15 grams per kilo per day, and they are still kind of flattening out. So we looked at growth percentiles. At birth, in the blue bars is the SGA babies. About 20% of our babies were SGA in this group, and about 80% were AGA. That's kind of normal. And then look to the right of that is what they ended up at discharge. What did we do to them? We have more babies in the blue group than we started with. So we have more babies below the 10th percentile by 40 weeks, or time for them to go home. And then we looked a closer look at like, where did these babies come from? 22% of babies in the AGA group, we brought down to below the 10th percentile. And then we didn't do our SGA group any favors because 100% of them stayed in that SGA category. 100% of them remained below the 10th percentile at birth. So even with 25 gram per kilo per day weight gain. So this just always reminds me to look at weight and growth from every angle possible that I can do that, including the angle of what type of weight are we putting on, which is what we're going to talk about at the very end of this talk, from body composition size. Is it lean mass or is it fat mass? So, you know, maybe we don't want to be, that's why we kind of stepped away from dumping a whole bunch of MCT oil onto babies a long time ago as just a routine thing, is because we were just putting fat tissue on them. And they weren't getting lean tissue. So we were doing better, but still had a ways to go. So this is one of my favorite slides to share with people about how to make babies grow better. So we have that whole list of, okay, go through all that list and, okay, are we at the right volume? Is anything adhering to the tubing? You know, what can we do? You know, how's our donor milk? Things like that. Once you go through that whole list, thinking about how are you using that fortifier for you. The human milk HMF product is different than the cow's milk HMF product. They can tolerate it earlier, we can use it earlier. And this is kind of where at Texas Children's Hospital, our 10 years and thousands of babies experience, we started off using +4 at 80. And then over that period of time, we've shifted. And so I say this as, this might look, now California is a different place because a lot of you are more accustomed to using the prolactin fortifier than in other parts of the world. So when I show this in other places, they kind of freak out about this. When I show it sometimes to some hospitals in California, they're like, okay, I'll right in this, like why, we don't have a problem with this. So just know that different hospitals, and even within California, different hospitals are doing different things. But some places when I think of these strategies as pretty aggressive, But we might look back on this a few years from now and say, oh no, this is actually pretty appropriate. This is what we should have been doing. So as I said, so at Texas Children's we've moved from +4 at 80 now to being more aggressive, but maybe more appropriate, where we start Prolacta +6 at 60. We don't even use the +4 anymore. So we've moved beyond that and we're able to start it earlier and they tolerate it very well. I've used these 4 groups because these are the 4 NAC members, the 4 dietitians on that Nutrition Advisory Committee. So it's really easy for me to reach out to them and just say, hey, I want to know what your feeding protocol is right now. I know what it was last year, but I want to know the most updated thing right now. And so that's really easy to do with them, those members. And it's a great snapshot of across the country, too. Portland is even more aggressive. They start +4 at 20. And then go to +6 at 60, and then they automatically go to adding cream to every baby at 130 mLs per kg per day. And they're seeing great growth, they don't see any intolerance problems, and now I'm waiting for them to publish that too. And then other places too, +6 at 60 or +8 at 80. Stacia in Columbia has told me that they are working on getting that +6 at 80 back down to +6 at 60 as well. And I think she has an automatic cream trigger as well. So it could be that you decide, like Portland, okay, we love cream and we're going to give it to everybody. And it could be like many other places where you decide, okay, well, we're going to have certain triggers, and that could be all babies less than 1,000 grams. When they hit a certain amount, we're going to give them cream. Or it could be all babies who don't reach a minimum of 15 grams per kilo per day for a week. Okay, now you get cream. Like you've shown that you're off plan. You've shown, like to use Terry's lingo from before. Something that I even like too is that this is a kind of an offside remark, but at Texas Children's over a long time, like years of a culture change, I got them to start recognizing that feeding intolerance wasn't just residuals and spit ups and belly looks like this and this and this. Feeding intolerance is also not growing. Because I can say, if you're not growing, you're not tolerating the nutrition plan that I'm providing for you. So in some cases, that has meant going back onto TPN, putting a line back in, recognizing the risk of that, recognizing that, okay, it looks like we're going backwards, but that baby's not progressing. And so we know we can make them grow on TPN. So putting them back onto TPN because they're not tolerating a nutrition care plan because they're not growing. And I just always think of that, how many IQ points am I sacrificing if I don't do that? You know, so even that extreme, as I said, so did you hear the part like it took years of a culture change yeah, that's been years of a culture change to shift back to like, let's put a new line in. So anyway, this is great, hopefully helpful information. If you are already at some of these levels in your hospital, then good for you. Like you're awesome and right where you're supposed to be, and maybe you can lead the way in moving the next steps and to say like, okay, is this what we know about this, and is this where we're at, or should we can we tweak this a little bit better too? So it's exciting to look forward to that. I get questions sometimes about, okay, we started it, we know who we're using it on, when to get them off of it. A lot of hospitals, I think, are using a cutoff of about 34 weeks or 1,500 grams, or a combination of both of those. That's probably like 80 to 85% of the hospitals that I talk to use that as a cutoff. And then what do you do after that? Well, those babies are still needing extra nutrition, and so now it's time, but they're past that risk of neck. And so that's really what that 34 mark gets you to, is reaching a lower risk of neck. But they still need extra fortifier. So now is the time to switch from your human milk-based HMF product to a non-acidified liquid HMF product is what I would recommend based on our previous talk. So even if you kind of were like, okay, well we just know human milk-based would be the best one, we have to use different products for different time points in a baby's life. So then switch them on to the non-acidified HPCL, and then when they hit around 2 kilos is where we often they need less of the minerals and less of vitamin A. So we might switch them off to a 22 calorie per ounce formula at that time. So it's fun to kind of walk through that strategy. And then you can, different hospitals have developed different strategies of how many days do you do that? How many days do you take to start introducing cow milk protein to this baby's gut at 34 weeks? And so some hospitals might go over 4 days. There's really not anything to say you should go longer than that. But then there's also hospitals who go from 1 day to the next. Like, absolutely, that's you guys. I hear somebody, that's us. What I can tell you is there's absolutely no data on any of it. So if it's working for you, okay, great. I don't have any data to show you that my way works better than your way. So that's what we got. We don't have anything to show. Okay, so I'll finish out with sharing with you our recent publication. It came out at the very end of last year, looking at these metabolic consequences among the SGA babies who got the human milk diet, exclusive human milk diet. So it's exciting to be part of something new, and this was the first time that anybody's ever brought back kids who got prolactin products to see how they did. So that's just exciting right there. And I like to always talk about that because it is important to always be doing something new and something more. This is the first study to evaluate long-term post-discharge growth, adiposity, and insulin resistance in AGA and SGA premature babies who received an exclusive human milk diet. This was only at our center at Texas Children's Hospital, so our protocol at the time, let's see, so this came out at the end of, and basically we fed them, they went home, we brought them back for the first outpatient visit at about 1 year of age, the second outpatient visit at about 2 years of age. At the first visit, we did labs and we got insulin levels and did dietary recalls. I did dietary recalls. Not we, I. Because they're a pain in the butt. And then at visit 2, we didn't get any more blood on them because it's a research project, and when you're used to being in the NICU, you can get all the labs you want. Doctor wants ionized calcium, boom, I'm on it, we'll get it. A 2-year-old who's otherwise healthy is in a volunteer research study. How many times are you gonna stick this kid? I say twice. And we have great research nurses. And so if we can't get it in 2 sticks, we're not gonna get it. So that it's a challenge is what I'm saying. So research in humans is a challenge, and research in kids is a big challenge. We also did a dual energy X-ray absorptiometry, or DEXA. This is where it can tell you, some of you may have had these in your doctor's office or something, they can tell you bone density. So a lot of women are getting those. But it can also tell you your body composition where it comes to fat mass, fat-free mass, percent body fat, things like that. This is the gold standard for that. So the one that your personal trainer talks you into at the gym is not as good as what we use clinically, which is a DEXA. Again, I did dietary recalls, and so that's what we did here. I was gonna say something else. I forgot about this. It'll hit me again later. Oh, yes. So again, we published this in 2018, which meant we spent most of 2018 writing it. And I remember it was part into 2017 that we were still writing it, and that's how papers go. Like, send it off to a journal, they give comments, it comes back, and then they finally say like, oh no, it's really not a good fit for us after all. It's you, it's not me. So then you have to send to another journal, and things like this happen. So it takes a while for things to get published sometimes. And so I believe, because I always get asked like, okay, well, what was your feeding protocol for these kids that are now 2 years old, and that we're looking at now? So when I think back to, okay, so we're analyzing data in 2017, so we're probably bringing these kids in 2016 as 2-year-olds. Okay, so then they were born in 2014. Okay, so what we're doing in 2014. Okay, so the first question I can tell you is we were not using cream in 2014, so none of these kids got cream, because I always ask about that. And then that's still probably 2014, we were still probably doing like +4 at 60. So what I can say now is, even though this just came out in the past 6 months, like, I feel like it's already out of date. I feel like I already want to know more. Like, I feel like, no, but now we're doing +6 at 60 and we use cream. And so how much better could these babies be doing than what this paper even shows. And so, but all of this, you know, I always want more data. Okay, we looked at insulin levels, and I just have this slide to point out what the HOMA-IR is. It's basically a calculation. If I told my dietitians, like, you know how BMI is a calculation based on two things, HOMA-IR is a calculation based on two things, based on your insulin level and your glucose level, and then there's a standard factorization in there. But it's a method of assessing insulin resistance. So that's what we measured. We had 50 babies, about 33 AGA, 18 SGA, all those dietary recalls that I did, where I said, tell me everything that your kid eats, and he's 1 year old, and like, what are you doing, and blah, 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 blah. No difference. Made absolutely no difference, but that's okay, because we needed to say that. We needed to say, it's because if we found that a certain subgroup of this population might have grown faster, I needed to be able to tell you, but that group also was eating ice cream every day. Yeah. So fortunately, I could go through and tell you, no, really, they all eat about the same. You know, they're all eating about the same fruits and vegetables, which is not enough. They're all eating, you know, the same amount of protein. They're all getting about the same amount of vitamin D. They're, you know, so it's basically all a wash. But I'm fine with that because I can say, you know, but we can't base it on like they were getting more ice cream. So here's some of our results. As expected, the SGA group has a higher gestational age than the AGA group, but similar body weights at about 900 grams birth weight. So, because that's what makes them SGA. What's more interesting too is their discharge weight. So even though they both started around 900 grams, the SGA babies are smaller at discharge than when they go home. So there's a significant difference there by about 300 grams that the AGA babies were able to keep going on that trajectory, whereas our SGA babies, like I showed in those other slides where we didn't do them any favors, they just kept floating along this way. One thing that was strange that just kind of popped out that sometimes you get with data is diet at discharge with breast milk. So more of our SGA babies went home on mom's milk than the AGA babies did. Now, what difference does that make, or how did that happen? The only thing we could kind of brainstorm was that maybe our bedside nurses were talking to the moms of the SGA babies and saying, look, you got an SGA baby. He's already got it tough enough. The least you can do is keep pumping. You know, so maybe there's a little bit more encouragement in that group. We have no way of knowing that. That is complete speculation, you know, so it's the only thing we could think of like, why is there a difference? But anyway, it doesn't affect anything later. We adjusted for it later too, and so it doesn't affect any of our results. So from the point of discharge to year 1, so 1 year of age, we brought him back in. There is still a difference in that the AGA babies are growing faster than the SGA babies. The SGA babies at this point are not fully catching up. They're still growing, but they're not fully catching up to the AGA babies. So that's okay, that just gives us some more information. Their length though is about the same, so they're kind of starting to catch up in length, but in weight and head circumference, they're not quite catching up yet to the AGA babies. Then at visit 1-2, you can see that, you know, as expected, if they're not catching up, here's the actual numbers behind that their weight, length, and head circumference are still slightly different. Okay, what were those lab results? What we found was that, this was a little bit surprising. We thought they would either be more equal or maybe opposite, but the SGA babies actually had better insulin levels than the AGA babies. So that was even more exciting. We're not even sure why that happens. But what we're seeing is that the SGA babies are definitely not being set up for insulin resistance. So we're excited about that. Again, it's a small study. It's the first one. It's the teeniest, tiniest little building block of where we're going to go in the future, right? So we take this with the grain of salt that it is. But it was good to see that the SGA babies had lower insulin levels. So then year 2 comes along, we bring them back in. They're slightly different, like, you know, a few weeks difference in when we brought them in. I don't think that's clinically significant. What's important here is now there's no longer any significance in their weight. So 10 kilos and 9.7 are the same, basically, in the stats world. So now their weight is the same, which means sometime between year 1 and year 2, the SGA babies grew faster than the AGA babies did, and they caught up. So they didn't fully catch up. They certainly didn't catch up by discharge. They were starting to catch up slowly by year 1, and now by year 2, we definitely see that they've caught up. Between visit 1 and visit 2, again, we see here, what we see mostly is again, I kind of mentioned BMI as a reference point to that HOMA IR, but we looked at BMI Z-scores and saw that the SGA babies had a greater gain in Z-score between year 1 and year 2, again, showing that they were catching up faster between year 1 and year 2 than the AGA babies were, because the AGA babies were already there. Okay, so that's all kind of, if you are a words person, that was for you. If you are a visual person, this is for you. Let me orient you to this slide. We've got weight, length, head circumference. The top line with the dots are our AGA kids. The bottom line with the squares are the SGA kids. The different time points are birth, discharge, visit 1, and visit 2. These are percentiles, and I've drawn a green line at the 10th percentile cutoff, because that's my key. I want to get them above that. So you can see for weight, birth and discharge, our SGA babies are still there. That the mean group average by year 1 is above the 10th percentile, but they're still not at a point where they are growing at the same rate as the AGA babies. But then by year 2, because you can still see see how much of this is flat here. This is cranked up. This is where the SGA kids took off. But again, I did all those dietary recalls, I swear. There's no difference. So it wasn't like the SGA babies started eating cheeseburgers at 1 year of age and ate a cheeseburger every day until age 2. They all ate the same. They all had the same caloric and macronutrient composition of their diets. So it wasn't that they were getting an extra 400 calories and so they were growing. So we're excited to see this again. And so I went back and I asked my neonatologist as we're writing the manuscript and as we're interpreting all of this and I'm helping writing all of this in the discussion section, and I go to them and I say, okay, let me make sure in plain English that I understand what we're trying to say here. Do you mean to tell me that what we fed these babies from, gestational age or from birth to 34 weeks of life, however many weeks that was in there, just a few weeks, this is a little snapshot of their life, a few weeks. You mean to tell me that a few weeks of what we fed them then, now we're going to claim at 2 years is responsible for this? Is this what we're going to say? Am I getting this right? And they're like, well, Kelly, we've accounted for everything else we can think of, so yeah, that's what we're going to start to say. I'm like, okay, so I'm still a bit of a skeptic on my own study. I'm like, really? We're really going to say this? But we've accounted for everything else. We haven't figured out anything else that we haven't accounted for. Again, tip of the iceberg, first study. Let's see what more data brings out. But I think what we can say is it's certainly not bad. And for hospitals using prolactin products, we can be a little bit more assured that now not only are we helping with NEC, late onset sepsis, BPD, ROP, all of those things. We, maybe we don't see the growth that we'd love to see right now. Maybe in the future we will start to see even better growth. But at 2 years of age, look what we've done. And again, to be part of this baby's life, where we were in that tiny little window, and we're seeing these impacts. So I think it's really incredible. So anyway, that's how I've interpreted all of this data. So the SGA and AGA babies had catch-up growth over time. They didn't have growth failure at 1 of 2 years of age, meaning that they weren't still below the 10th percentile by that point. Suggestive, and this is where I was like, I'm really going to say this? Suggestive that the adequate nutrients and energy coming from the exclusive human milk diet in the NICU was potentially playing a role in this outcome. I think that's where I'd like to come down on this, to say potentially playing a role in this outcome. Visit 2 DEXA results. Nothing is in bold here because nothing is significant, which is great for me. Because what we showed here was that the SGA babies' bones were just as good as the AGA babies' bones. So I'm excited about that. I'm excited to see that. And the SGA, even more importantly when it comes to metabolic syndrome, SGA babies did not have more fat mass than the AGA babies did. This is not what we used to see in the formula studies. So now their fat mass and lean mass are appropriate. So they caught up by age 2, that line went up, they caught up in weight gain, but it wasn't fat mass. We weren't just stacking on fat mass, putting them at risk for type 2 diabetes and heart disease later on. So I'm glad nothing was in bold on this slide. And again, so this is, if you're a words person, this is for you, adequate bone mineralization and fat mass and lean mass. We looked at fat mass in relation to the insulin levels. So one thing to think of is, yeah, there were insulin levels at age 1 and fat mass levels at age 2. So that's a limitation of the study, but you can only get so many blood draws on a kid in a study. So we did see that the SGA babies had a positive correlation between trunk fat mass and their insulin levels that wasn't seen in the AGA population. So again, so there's something about that, but knowing, so they were correlated, but we know that overall their fat-free mass was the same as the AGA babies, and they had less insulin resistance than the AGA babies. So we're not, again, this is a little bit like we're not sure what to do with this yet, and we'd like to look for some more data. Again, that kind of explains the insulin resistance results. As I've kind of mentioned throughout that there's a few of these limitations to the study. If you ever wanted the perfect study, that would cost you like $1 billion and you'd be waiting 10 years of your life to get it. And then it would be outdated. So, so there's no perfect study. One of the issues with a study like this is that we asked parents to bring their kids back to us, to come back at 1 year of age to let us stick them, to come back at 2 years of age to let us basically give you an x-ray, so there's a tiny bit of risk to that. But even just making the effort to come back to see us and let us talk to your kid about, let's talk to you about your kid's nutrition. There's possible selection bias in that the type of parent who agrees and says, oh yeah, I'm totally interested in nutrition. I am interested in my kid's future and I am absolutely willing to come back and for $20 I will participate in your research study. Versus the one who's like, I don't really care about that, that's not important to me. I'm just gonna go home and switch to formula anyway because I can do that. And I gotta go back to work and I got 6 kids at home and I don't have time to come in and for $20, no, I'm not doing that. So there could be a difference in the type of families that we got. And maybe the types of families that we got are the ones who don't feed ice cream every day. So it's difficult to interpret all of that, but just it's important to kind of recognize, as I'm saying, an exclusive human milk diet may potentially be part of the role of this. There's a lot more that we still have yet to find out. And as a researcher, I just have to feel like I have to stand up here and say it that way. There's just a lot more for us to know. So I was going to say a slightly other thing about that, but I forgot to. Anyway, so what I can say is that our take-home messages were that the very low birth weight, premature AGA and SGA babies fed the exclusive human milk diet, had appropriate growth at 1 and 2 years of age, that none of them, of the group averages, had percentiles less than the 10th percentile for those factors by 2 years of age. The SGA babies had greater catch-up growth that happened later on without increased adiposity and without increased insulin resistance compared to the AGA group. Oh, now I remember what I was going to say. So we didn't have a control group for this study either. Because, like I said, so now we're talking about babies that were born in 2014. And we started using Prolacta in 2006. We didn't have any 2-year-olds that were not on Prolacta to compare it to. So for us to make that kind of comparison would be for us to work with another hospital. Okay, fine. Let's go talk to another hospital who doesn't use Prolacta products or have an exclusive human milk diet, and go to them and say, we want to bring your babies back at 1 and 2 years of age and test all of this stuff because we think your babies suck. You want to participate? So that's also some difficulties of why with study design and why you can't really you can't get a perfect study. And so that's part of, yes, we don't have a control group, and those are some of the challenges of what we would have faced to try to get a control group. Okay, so some future directions. Here's done a great job talking about microbiome today too. It's good because if you go to a neo-nutrition lecture series and nobody mentions microbiome, you should ask for your money back, because it's definitely where we need to be talking about. There's a study going on in Canada right now, and they're looking at different types of fortifier and trying to see, again, what fortifier you're feeding, how does that impact your microbiome? How does that set up your gut for success or failure? How does that lead to identifying factors like, if your microbiome looks like this, next week you're gonna get neck. You know, like in the future, I think we're gonna be able to use the microbiome as a little bit of a crystal ball to get there. Because what we're doing right now is we're taking stool samples on every kid, every day, weekly, just trying to track all of that, and then when we get a case of neck, going backwards and seeing, okay, what did his microbiome look leading up to this? And you can actually see changes over time and seeing how that goes. So if we are able to get enough data where we can switch that, and instead of it being more retrospective, using it as that prospective crystal ball, I mean, that's where we're at. The Canadian study, the problem with this is because they aren't approved to have any liquid HMF. So this study is going to be prolactababies against powdered cow's milk HMF, to which we in America go like, oh, come on, give me something better. Well, that's all Canada has to work with. So they're doing the best with what they have. Overall, we should be working to improve growth, working to improve those percentile growth, recognizing we may not have enough time to do that in the NICU, but we can be more assured that it's happening long term and at 1 and 2 years of age. And overall, providing the safest, most effective product to babies, utilizing human milk because of all the benefits, but still making the baby grow and be safe. So that's all I have for you. I want to end with this quote by Thomas Edison and my Uncle Bob out on the ranch. Opportunity is missed by most people because it's dressed in overalls and looks like work. and there's him in his overalls and his Sunday shirt for sure. And you know, we've talked a lot about challenges, but I want to encourage you to think of these challenges as opportunities. And just then think of all of the opportunities that we have to impact these babies' lives for their whole life. So, thanks for coming. I'm going to turn it back over to Donna to remind you to fill out your evaluations.